Is Bill Maher getting red-pilled? He's more and more sounding like it. In this video, we're going to take a look at what may be his most scathing critique of the woke left yet. How such a critique echoes the concerns of patriots all across the nation, and why Maher's observations are precisely why patriots like Donald Trump are winning all over the world. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you. As always, we are your daily fake news antidote. As each and every day, we analyze current events in light of patriotic trends to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we jump into things here, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that is the makers of this awesome, this totally cool fighter flare flashlight. You are going to love this. One of the best things that you can invest in for your protection when the lights go out is the 6-in-1 Beauty, which comes with a 3000 mAh solar-powered recharging battery. It's equipped with a high and low beam light that you can see from miles away, and has an emergency strobe light, a compass, a wire and rope cutter, an emergency glass breaker hammer, and a high-powered military-grade magnet. It is absolutely awesome. And best of all, if you click on that link below right now, you're going to get 20% off the regular price. But don't wait. Supply is limited. Click on that link below and get your super awesome fighter flare flashlight today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. Comedian and political commentator Bill Maher is turning heads once again with his latest scorching critique of woke leftism. On his most recent HBO program, Real Time, Maher, who describes himself as a liberal and progressive, nevertheless went full animal on woke leftists whose obnoxious antics and odious ideology sees as destroying the political left. And by the way, Bill Maher's not alone on this. We did a video on the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair sounding the alarm that the progressive left faces extinction in Europe. You're not going to want to miss that video because he really spells out the woke left's demise from a whole different vantage point than Maher does, but it's nonetheless every bit as relevant as Maher's concerns. What Bill Maher did is he focused his critique on what he called progressophobia, okay, the fear of progress. It's a term coined by the cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker. Maher defined progressophobia as, quote, a brain disorder that strikes liberals and makes them incapable of recognizing progress. It's like situational blindness, only what you can't see is that your dorm in 2021 is better than the South before the Civil War. And basically that definition, likening some of his fellow liberals to those with brain disorders, that definition begins the scathing critique of what passes as liberal orthodoxy in the contemporary Democratic Party that could have been delivered, frankly, by any patriot or non-woke Republican. And it was so interesting, as Peggy Noonan pointed out, it was so noticeable how the audience laughed very, very nervously throughout the monologue. They were scared to death of being caught laughing at the wrong thing, since woke leftists are such unforgiving totalitarians. So Maher went on, quote, if you think that America is more racist now than ever, more sexist than before women could vote, you have progressophobia. And he went on to observe that America is far less racist today than it's ever been. So, quote, in 1958, only 4% of Americans approved of interracial marriage. Now Gallup doesn't even bother asking. But the last time they did in 2013, 87% approved. An overwhelming majority of Americans now say they want to live in a multiracial neighborhood. In a country that's 14% black, 18% of the incoming class at Harvard is black. Employees of color make up 47% of Microsoft, 50% at Target, 55% of the Gap, as companies become desperate to look like their TV commercials. Now, what Maher is getting at here has been corroborated by numerous studies that all show a dramatic decline in racist sentiments over the last several decades. So, for example, you may be unaware that a recent study from two sociologists at the University of Pennsylvania measured the racial attitudes of some 2,500 Americans over the course of the last several years since 2008 when Obama was elected. And what they found was that racism actually decreased since President Trump was elected. They found that anti-black prejudice declined rather insignificantly during the period between 2012 and 2016 when Obama was president. But after 2016, anti-black prejudice took a significantly sharp dive among both Republicans and Democrats. The researchers saw a comparable decline as well in anti-Hispanic prejudice. Racism went down under Trump. But you're not going to hear that from the mainstream Marxist media, are you? And by the way, that's not an anomaly. Again, as Maher pointed out, the decrease in racist sentiments has been going on for decades, and not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. I would recommend for everyone's reading a book, I've mentioned it before, by British scholars Roger Eatwell, Matthew Goodwin, entitled National Populism, where they document how blatant racism has been on the decline in most Western nations for decades. So, for example, again, when asked questions like, would you feel comfortable if one of your relatives married somebody from a different ethnic group? Or would you work for someone who's ethnic? Or would you be comfortable living next to a family of a different ethnicity, right? These are all what we would call classic markers of traditional racist sentiments. And yet, across much of the West, the number of people who would feel uncomfortable with all those things has plummeted. And as Bill Maher pointed out, back in 1958, Gallup has shown more than 90% of Americans disapproved of interracial marriage. Today, it's the exact opposite. 90% approve. In Britain, more than half of the population opposed intergroup relations. Actually, as recently as the 1980s, today, fewer than 1 in 4 do. Study after study after study shows that racist sentiments have been plummeting over the last several decades throughout the West. And so I think Maher is absolutely correct in this. He cited the comedian Kevin Hart, who recently told the New York Times that, quote, kid you not, quote, you're witnessing white power and white privilege at an all-time high. That's an astonishing statement. We are witnessing white power and white privilege, whatever the hell that means, at an all-time high today. Well, Bill Maher wasn't having any of that. Listen to what he said. Quote, this is one of the big problems with wokeness, that what you say doesn't have to make sense or jibe with the facts or ever be challenged, lest the challenge itself be conflated with racism. Saying white power and privilege is at an all-time high is just ridiculous. Higher than a century ago, the year of the Tulsa race massacre, higher than when the KKK rode unchecked and Jim Crow unchallenged. I understand best. I can see how racism singes a person so much that they see it everywhere. But seeing clearly is necessary for actually fixing problems. And clearly racism no longer is everywhere. It's not my home. It's probably not in yours if I read my audience right. And I think I do. For most of the country, the most unhip thing you could ever be today is a racist. And then Maher went on to turn his attention on the increasing phenomenon of what's called neo-segregation, where the radical left, particularly on college campuses, has more and more been insisting on actually going back and deliberately segregating the campus along racial lines, but now on critical race terms, right? So in a recent study, 42% of the 173 schools surveyed offered segregated dorms, 46% offered segregated orientation programs, and an astonishing 72% hosted segregated graduation ceremonies. So Maher noted, quote, there are a hell of a lot of Americans trying really hard these days to create a new spirit of inclusion and self-reflection, and this progressive allergy to acknowledging societal advances is self-defeating. Having a warped view of reality leads to policies that are warped. That's a great observation. Having a warped view of reality leads to policies that are warped, such as blacks-only dorms and graduation ceremonies, a growing belief in whiteness as a malady, and that white people are irredeemable. Giving up on a colorblind society. Only if you believe we've made no progress does any of that make sense. And the irony in all of this, Maher doesn't get into this, but we have wider studies that demonstrated all these ad nauseum accusations of racism, what Maher calls progressophobia, all this obsession on racism has inadvertently made it easier for patriot populists like Donald Trump to get elected. And that's precisely because the threat of being called a racist is so feared by members of the liberal political class, by mainstream and centrist politicians, that they kind of go into a kind of political paralysis. The fear of being labeled a racist makes them refuse to talk about things like, for example, immigration. They refuse to address the serious issues of dramatic demographic changes in rural areas. They refuse to deal with the potential strains on our social services by unfettered immigration or the rising crime rates and violence committed often by illegal immigrants. And so what that fear of speaking out on such real political concerns does is it opens up opportunities for what some scholars call bootleggers. So these are people who are technically third-party candidates who have no fear whatsoever in being labeled a racist precisely because they're not part of the liberal political class, and that's why they're winning. People like Trump are winning precisely because the political class and the mainstream media have paralyzed themselves and permanently separated themselves from being able to address real political issues that real voters care about. So is Bill Maher getting red-pilled? Well, that remains to be seen, but there's no question that despite Maher's stubborn fidelity to leftist progressivism, he's sounding more and more like a patriot each and every day. Now, before you go, you'll definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded. You're going to love this. It's on how French President Emmanuel Macron has suffered an absolute election disaster over the weekend. Sorry, it's over here. You're not going to want to miss this. I got to get it. So make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.